Okay, good evening, everybody. My name is Daniel Baird, and I'm an event facilitator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. And before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 1 territory, which is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Nininuak, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, as well as the homeland of the Red River Métis. Additionally, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. And I'd like to thank you all for being here for a very special evening as we celebrate the launch of John D Atchison Architect, His Works and Times, from Gail Perry, and published by the Winnipeg Architecture Foundation. Give them all a round of applause. Yes. And so in just a moment, you'll be out for a presentation and to talk on their book. And then following that, there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions. So you do have a question tonight. Please let those percolate throughout the evening. And when the time does come, I'll walk out again with my wireless microphone, and I just ask you to raise your hand nice and high so I can pass you the microphone, simply to ensure that the folks who are watching at home can hear you. And then I'll be back at the very end to review how the signing procedure will go, which will of course take place at the table on my right. But for now, I have the absolute pleasure of introducing tonight's special guest. Gail Perry, BA and LLB, is an architectural history enthusiast, the first heritage designation officer for the province of Manitoba, and a founder of the Winnipeg Architecture Foundation. She's a 2020 recipient of the Lieutenant Governor General's Award for Historical Preservation and Promotion, having researched, written, and presented on Winnipeg's built heritage for over 30 years. Her articles have been published in such publications as the Association for Preservation Technology International, Communique, sorry, my French is bad, Heritage Magazine, Perry History Journal, and the Winnipeg Free Press, with pieces on PBS television and CBC radio. She's active with the Manitoba Historical Society and Winnipeg Architecture Foundation. And of course, here to tell us more about her new book on one of Winnipeg's most prolific and accomplished early 20th century architects. Please join me in welcoming Gail Perry.
Okay. Thank you, Daniel, and thanks to McNally Robinson for this opportunity. You know, here in Winnipeg, we are so lucky to have an institution like McNally Robinson, which has robust programming that supports writers and bookmakers, and well, just evenings like this. Yes. Yes, I think yes. It really is magical how an intangible idea can become a manuscript. It's a lot of help too with photographs. And then it becomes a book, and that book is manufactured and distributed to people. And so I think that today we're celebrating the creation of books as much as the birth of a particular one. Friends, colleagues, everybody who's here, everybody who's online, welcome. This is a special night. It's a night of celebration, and it is a night of gratitude. It's a night of celebration in that at last we have a book on John D Atchison, and it's been, I always say like John D as in deserving. But gratitude as well, because so many people here have had a hand in making this book possible. And I see architects, architectural historians, librarians, archivists. I know that there are people here who were early readers of my early manuscripts, people who have made archival photographs available to me, and it's just really, really phenomenal. I think that writers are kind of hesitant to admit this, or they're not happy to admit this, but it is a picture that says 1,000 words. And any architectural book that is worth its salt has many, many photographs. And I hope that you find this one particularly salty. So I'm showing you here one of the pages. It's typical in that it has text. I hope that the text is chatty and personable and informative, but it is peppered with photographs. And I've tried to make the citations juicy, not just the name of the building and the date, but something a little bit more informative than that. Scattered throughout the book are approximately 24 sidebars, and the sidebars are demarked by a kind of a bold color, and they are discrete passages. So you could, if you really need an Atchison fix, but you don't want to really look at the whole book at a particular time, you could just pick up one of these sidebars, and you could read a discrete story about an Atchison associate, a particular building, or one of the many bizarre incidences that happened in his life. Now, all of these contemporary photographs, which I've shown you to this point, were taken by David Furman. And David is actually taking photographs right now because he can't stop taking photographs. But whether or not the picture was taken, sorry, I was just gonna say, as well, we have the thumbnail sketches. So these represent each one of his existing buildings anywhere in North America. So there's 103 of them. And so again, they were mostly all taken by David. There might be 8 to 10 contemporary pictures that were not his. I know which ones they are identified, so you'll know as well. But whether or not the picture was taken in Chicago, or Winnipeg, or Saskatchewan, this is Moose Jaw, or California, this is San Marino. I can say that they were photographs taken by David. Many of you know David because he's a retired architect and a fine art photographer, but he is also my husband of 35 years. For 7.5 of those years, he's had to share the marriage with this guy, John D Atchison. I'd like to thank some other people. This is a grotesque that was once atop the Tribune building. That building was an Atchison building. It's being pulled down, but this fellow, who is a medieval printer, lives in the Manitoba Museum. And for me, he represents the publishing team, which is the Winnipeg Architecture Foundation. So the Winnipeg Architecture Foundation is a nonprofit organization that has been in existence for 30 years now that is dedicated to promoting and informing about Winnipeg's built heritage. In just 30 years, this is the 24th publication on Winnipeg design that it has published. So I'm going to ask Susan Elgie, the executive director, to just wave or give a nod or let us know. Now she's got the team here. This team has worked on many of the gorgeous books that they've produced. So one of the people is another Susan McClellan, who is the copy editor. Now here we've got another gargoyle. He is the editor that used to be on the Tribune building, again, in the Manitoba Museum. Now I have to say, Susan Emma, would you please make yourself known? There you go. Thank you. Susan didn't have these dastardly scissors, or she did, but she took a light touch. She was very, very kind. And then the book itself is a very, very elegant book, and it is the creation of Robin Shesterniak. Robin, would you please wave? And Robin has created a lot of books for law. Let's look at some of the spreads because they really are elegant. So here we're into some archival photographs. This is typical of a chapter. So it has text on the right, and then it will have an image or a couple of images. Often there's bleeds, so it's really large and impressive. So that would be a typical spread. A couple of pages later in that same chapter, we've got these lovely archival photographs with merely citations. But it's very rhythmic, it's very clear, and it's inviting to look at. And then the next page, we have a combination of text and photographs and citations, and it just flows and moves just so beautifully. So we're very lucky to have this book. Now, it was a book that just had to be written. John D Atchison really created much of our downtown, many of our landmarks. There were 140 buildings that he designed or redesigned during his 18 years here between 1905 and 1923. Of those, we have 55 still standing, 54 still in use. So that's quite a testimony to his skill as a designer in making efficient, workable buildings. Now, you might not know what buildings are his, but you certainly know the buildings. So I'm going to show you just a few Winnipeg chestnuts. There are going to be more chestnuts in the book, and often they are the subject of sidebars. So here we have the Bank of Hamilton on Main Street and McDermott. The White House on Portage Avenue between Fort and Gary. Now into the suburbs, we have in Tuxedo, the former Manitoba School of the Deaf, now the flagship building of the Canadian Mennonite University. And in Crescentwood, at the corner of Stafford and Grosvenor, you pass this all the time, there's lights there even, still serving its original purpose as a mixed-use building. You know, we talk about mixed use today, that's the kind of building you want to build. Still in use after over 100 years. Now, many people here who are Atchison aficionados might not be familiar with some other buildings, and we've tried to give you as many buildings in the book, and definitely the ones that are still standing. So people might not be as likely to know houses that were built for families. You know, this isn't a big commercial project that was done for downtown, but this is Atchison's oldest home in Crescentwood, built in 1909, the William C. Russell House. It was built for the real estate agent for the earliest homes built in Crescentwood. This one you might know as a local landmark on North Main Street at Bannerman. It was a very early branch for a bank. It was the Merchants Bank, 1913, to have a suburban bank. That was quite unusual. It's now a community services building. Interiors. People often don't get into the insides of these buildings, and I would certainly encourage you to do so if you can. So this elegant elliptical staircase is in the Bank of Hamilton building. The Bank of Hamilton building has city offices, so during working hours, you can walk in. This is just off the lobby. It's to the right of the lobby, and when you walk into the lobby, the ceiling is gilt. It's gold leafed. If you venture further, you'll see the banking hall with a wooden ceiling that has intricate, very colorful images on it. It's just patterns. It's just beautiful. So kind of free of charge, you can go take a gander. Winnipeggers aren't going to probably know the one building of Atchison's in Manitoba that's still standing, but not in Winnipeg, and that is the Emerson Courthouse and Town Hall, still being used for its original functions, again after over 100 years. The book talks about Atchison as being an urban planner or a city planner as well. There's more information than we've had in the past now with respect to this. You know, it was more aspirational than realized, but his ideas were progressive. They were good ideas that still apply today. So what you see at the top there is not even his initial, it was his downgraded plan for a mall approach to the new legislative building. When that picture came out, they were just turning the sod that week for the ledge. He wanted something that looked very monumental. Instead, we get Memorial Boulevard, which has some very lovely buildings, and it's taken some of the concepts that were originally Atchison's, but it is not quite the same. So it's kind of a pallid rendition. And this is what you kind of feel when you look at city planning. The book also has a chapter about the contributions he made to enduring artistic and educational facilities here in Winnipeg and serving all of Manitoba. So notably, he was a founder of the Winnipeg Art Gallery, but at the time of the founding, it was known as the Winnipeg Museum of Fine Art. By 1923, it had the Winnipeg Art Gallery name, moniker, and this photograph is from then. And Atchison was still here until the fall of 1923, so he would probably be familiar with this room. The room was in the building he designed, the Winnipeg Industrial Bureau building, which no longer stands at the corner of Water and Main Street, where the federal building now stands. Now, we knew a lot of this information. It's just that now with the book, we know more information. My concern was that, you know, if another generation passed, we were going to lose Atchison altogether. So it was important to get this information collected and together as a start. You know, as we always say, we invite somebody else to take the torch and find out more. But to me, he was kind of a two-dimensional figure. And I wanted somebody who had a bit of personality, if possible. And let's know about who this person really was. Now, unfortunately, as far as we know, we don't have any diaries, we don't have any personal letters. Got some new photographs. So this is new for people in Winnipeg. This is a picture of Atchison in his 70s in the 1940s. He's the gentleman, of course, in the front right. Here he is with family in Pasadena. And I got this photograph from somebody who knew him. Believe it or not, Atchison, who was born in 1870, died in 1959, had a granddaughter who was still alive in 2022, age 86, very cogent, and she was a little girl on her mother's lap in this picture. So the little girl is Betty Jane, and now Betty Jane, when I talked to her, Betty Jane Witz. She has passed since, unfortunately. She's sitting on her mother's knee. She's Betty Jane Sr., Atchison's daughter. And then behind the mother, the young boy with the stripy shirt is David, Atchison's grandson. So David and little Betty Jane are the parents of the descendants of Atchison who now live in California. So the person who made this possible was my genealogist friend, Sarah Mosher. So Sarah, will you make yourself known? Because this connection would not have been made without Sarah. And I got some interesting information from Mrs. Woods. She told me that her grandfather was always neat and tidy, dressed very, very well. He was a great conversationalist. But the thing is that he didn't talk about himself. So this was not helpful to a historian. He liked to put the other person at ease. He wanted to find out about the other person. He was kind of like an empath or something. And so that's a little bit unfortunate, but you know, it does kind of help verify the fact that he had long friendships, long associates in business, and did well in business because he was that kind of person. He was very supportive of his daughter's career as a oil painter. She was of some renown in California, was well known. And then little Betty Jane ended up becoming a watercolor painter who was very good as well. So there's this artistic bent in the family. John was an amateur watercolorist too. She said that he loved books, particularly books on architecture. So I think that he would have liked this event very much. So we're pleased with that. And if you were ever to go to his house for dinner, he'd invariably make you a salad. So he might not have been a cook. But he always had a little plate of Ritz crackers with him. So that sort of really made him human. So with that in mind, and as a tribute to John Atchison, and for this night only, if you buy the John D Atchison book tonight, courtesy of the author, you will get a sachet of Ritz crackers to remember John D Atchison. So I do encourage you to act. Now, I'm not the only person who is interested in John Atchison over these years. As some of our friends know, some of the longer timers, there was a person named Phil Hayes who was very interested in Atchison and did a tremendous amount of work, tremendous research between the late 1980s and the early 2000s. Phil was a long-time Winnipegger, but he was originally from Wisconsin, very close to Chicago, and he had family in Chicago, would visit and he would do research. And his intention was to write a book. Sadly, Phil died before he wrote the book. His wife, Betty Hayes, who is here with us, Betty, and Betty's family is here as well. And our mutual friend, Randy Rostecki, the Dean of Architectural Historians in all of Manitoba. Randy, can you give us a wave? Thought to it that all the boxes of Phil's very valuable research were put in the Manitoba Legislative Library, so they were available for research. And of course, I worked with them and was grateful every day that I did do that. So this book is very much, there's Phil here too. As well, with the passage of time, there were more things that were available online that I could avail myself to. A wonderful, wonderful resource that many people here know is the Biographical Dictionary of Architects in Canada, edited by Robert Hill. Robert Hill sadly died in the past 6 weeks. And when he did, his resource that has been online for decades went black. First, we thought it was out of in honor of him. Apparently a casino, that's the word I got, a casino has got the domain name and it's gone offline, and we know that there are people here in Canada, historians are going to try and get that back online however we can do it. A lot of references in this book are to that resource, and now it's not here. And then during COVID times, I wasn't able to go to Chicago to do research. And as a result, I linked up with a doctorate candidate from the Illinois Institute of Technology by the name of Alejandro Saldana Pareles. And I know that Alejandro is watching from Chicago today with Maria and Victoria, so we say hello from Winnipeg. And on my behalf, he did a great deal of research in different collections, archives, libraries. And so I also thank Alejandro. So you can see that this is, quite the work with so many people who have helped along the way and really over the years. So most of the book is about Winnipeg, because that is the bulk of Atchison's career between the ages of 35 and 53, when he had a young family and when he was doing a lot of land speculation and he was here during the boom times here in Winnipeg. But, it was his time in Chicago that informed his work in Winnipeg. And so the book now has more information about his early training and his very valuable time, albeit only 18 months, with the famous architectural firm, Jenny and Mundy. William LeBaron Jenny is known as the father of the skyscraper. Some say he built the first steel frame or metal frame structure. That isn't really quite true, but he showed the feasibility of it. So he is very, very important. And in 1893, when Atchison was working for him, and by the way, Jenny didn't just take anyone to work for him. So Atchison must have been very good at the age of 22, 23. But he was already world-renowned and historically renowned. So Atchison said he worked on several skyscrapers while he was with the firm. Well, the firm had 3 going up during that 18-month period, but they could have been doing work on ones that had already gone up. There's always post-work and everything. But one that was going up was this building. So this isn't an Atchison building. This is a Jenny building in Chicago, the New York Life building, which is now a hotel that you could stay at if you wanted. Some people say that it is the first building that has the classic tall building configuration that came out of Chicago, where a building emulates a classical column with a base at the bottom, which is quite distinctive, and then any number of repeating floors that are all the same, and then usually, and this is a really early example, as I say, maybe the first, usually an attic a floor that is unique, as well as then a cornice. And so that's supposed to look like the capital of the column, base, shaft, capital. And so what we see here, Atchison probably worked on this. He certainly knew this building when it was going up. 20 years later, he built the Boyd building here in Winnipeg, and I think he outclasses the father of the skyscraper here. So you can really read the building well with dark colored terracotta for the base, 2 colors for the shaft, and then white for the cornice. This, by the way, is not a steel frame structure like the New York Life. Atchison has gone on, and this is a reinforced concrete frame building. But, you know, this kind of a Chicago style building, and it's on Portage Avenue, and it's on the cover of the book. Atchison also brought to Winnipeg the Prairie School style of architecture. People will associate this with the early houses, the early residences of Frank Lloyd Wright, and some of the work by Wright's mentor, Louis Sullivan, who, by the way, was mentored by William LaBerengeni. So you see that all of these people are all in a lineage and they're all intertwined. So this is the Evanston Apartments in Evanston, Illinois, which is a city, independent city, but it's contiguous to Chicago. So it just flows into Chicago. And this building has, you know, the distinctive characteristics. So we talk about something that has a real linear thrust, that has usually hip roof that's shallow, but very deep eaves. It's of the arts and crafts style, so you know it has sumptuous materials inside and out. So think of that, it's kind of mirroring by going sideways, from left to right rather than up and down, the Midwest, the landscape of the American Midwest. But it's also mirroring the prairies, the Canadian prairies. So here we have the Wardlaw or Wardlaw Apartments on Wardlaw, and it is in the Osborne Village District on Wardlaw. Now, when the building was built, the street was called Wardlaw, and so it's carved with that name. And then a few years later, they changed it to Wardlaw. So it's known by both names, I think more often Wardlaw today, but a gorgeous, gorgeous building, which is now condominiums. Atchison also was an innovator of a typology of apartments called the suburban courtyard apartment. And this was typically like an amalgam of 3 apartments sewn together in a U shape, and then in the center would be a lovely lawn that would be landscaped. And these were meant for suburbs. These were meant to be very sympathetic to the single family homes that they were beside, homes that often had historic revival styles like Tudor or Dutch gable or something to that effect. This is another prairie style that Atchison chose. But you've got to imagine that this kind of an apartment was built all over North America. This is the 3rd that was built in North America within months of 2 that were built in Boston. So he was definitely an innovator of this style. This is on the US Register of Historic Places as a building worthy of preservation architecturally and historically. And hey, a year later, Atchison is in Winnipeg and he designs Lee Court Apartments in the Elizabethan style. This was a lovely oasis of green with a lovely metal fence around it, grill fence. And it stood until the early 1980s. It was pulled down for the Millennium Library. If you remember the Devon Court on Broadway, it was also of this typology. It had the lovely courtyard in the front. It was also U-shaped. Unfortunately, we have neither of these anymore. Well, as I said, most of the book is about Winnipeg. Chicago informs Winnipeg's work. And Atchison leaves Winnipeg in 1923 for maybe a booming place, well, definitely a booming place in 1923, Los Angeles with the oil and the film industry and all that was happening there. All the people who were coming in, it was just burgeoning with the new population. So there was a lot of opportunity early on anyways when he got there. So for Winnipeggers, this part of the book is kind of an epilogue. What happened to Atchison afterwards? For people who live in California, this is the story of some very beautiful houses that are still being used in California. So I thought I'd just give you a little taste of it. This is a small practice that Atchison now has. It's kind of a one-man operation, only residences. He doesn't do any institutions. He doesn't do any commercial stuff. So here we have the first or the second, it's not quite clear, building that he built once he got to California, and he built it for himself. He was an astute businessman. He built this as a revenue apartment that would help hedge against the vagaries of, the architectural practice. And it was probably a smart move on his part. It reads like a house almost, but it is indeed a fourplex. And now he's experimenting with kind of Mediterranean revival styles. You didn't see any of that in Chicago. You didn't see any of that in Winnipeg. But now this is a very fashionable kind of a style in California, and very sympathetic and in keeping with the beautiful countryside and the landscape of California. He lived in this rental apartment, his own rental apartment, for the last 19 years of his life when he was a widower. So he kept it until his death. But prior to that, he built for the family a home, and this is called the Monterey style, Monterey Colonial, because it's got this long balcony on the top. And this was how buildings looked in the community of Monterey, California, which began as first a Spanish community, then a Mexican community, then a California community, but the historic buildings had this long balcony. So he liked this style. Now, to me, this looks like something that came out of 1950, 1960, 1929. So this is Atchison at kind of his most modern. And he's quite a traditionalist, and he's still hearkening back to a historic kind of a period. Right across the street, he builds this lovely, lovely home for his daughter. We've met her already, Betty Jane, and her family, and the little girl who grew up and was able to talk to me and tell me about her grandmother. And believe it or not, after almost 90 years, this has had only 3 owners. And this is quite typical of Atchison homes, that there are very few owners because they're so good, they work. They've got a beautiful flow, they've got beautiful fittings, and they can be adapted, and he built them to be adapted. So this he called a French style, I'm not sure. There's a bit of a chateau roof there in the middle. He's got multi-pane windows that kind of look French country with the shutters. But it's really a beautiful kind house, and I think he was, by calling it French, and that was on the building permit, I think he was kind of, sidling up to his daughter. His daughter studied art and dance in 1920s Paris. How lucky can you be? So I think she was probably a Francophile. And I know that the owners of this lovely home, Marilee and Bob in Pasadena, are watching tonight. So let's say hello to them. And to all the other owners who might be watching, it's just been a delight. Now, I would say that you've noticed that Atchison built for himself rather modest looking homes. They were comfortable, they were wonderful homes. But he was not a glitzy guy. He could build really fancy for other people. So in California, we have this lovely Tudor fantasy, which was featured in the 1930s edition of the Architectural Digest. And then in Prospect Park, which is a very exclusive enclave in Pasadena, he built this house, believe it or not, during the Depression. Actually, the other one was 29, just before the Depression. This one's about 1931, 32. This enclave has only the best architects. Frank Lloyd Wright built here. Wallace Neff, known as the architect to the Hollywood stars, built here. Myron Hunt, who was famous both in Chicago and in Pasadena. Huntington Museum, That's Hunt. As well, the Green brothers, Green and Green, who built the Gamble House, which is a world famous arts and crafts house, which is really close to this one. So Atchison is in very, very good company. He's not out of place, and he's ours as well. I would just add that he has 2 houses in Hollywood, and one of them still stands. So I think with him at that high level of acclaim, I'm going to complete my comments and entertain any questions that you might have. And we can always talk to later on.
So if you have any questions, now's the time. You can raise your hand and I'll come by with the wireless microphone. Yeah.
Just wanted to know what sparked your interest in this architect.
You know, I've always been interested in architecture from the time I was a little kid. And so my father and I would go and look at old buildings on the weekends. And he had a background in building as a building assessor, city assessor, and a building appraiser and a builder before that. So he would tell me about construction, and he knew that I liked these things. So, you know, you got very fond of buildings. When I got to an age, and I don't think it was my age, I think it was the times. Once the centennial year came for Canada, for Manitoba, for the city of Winnipeg, there were more and more architectural books being written. And finally, they were telling us who the architects were. Like, you know, you heard about who wrote compositions in music and who were the writers of famous books, but somehow we weren't talking about who architects were, and I never even thought of it. All of a sudden, I discovered that a name that comes up more than any other is the author, if you will, of many of my favorite buildings. So it really got me thinking. And then by that time, I was already reading about my heroes in Chicago. I realized he would have, because I knew as much that he worked there at that time. I thought they must know each other. So like, what is the connection? And it was kind of killing me that I didn't know. So I think a lot of people have writing projects where it just kills them. They have to find out. And then once it's done, you feel a lot better. Like it's, oh, now I know. So yeah, that was the reason.
Yeah, we have a question back there.
I know historians and interpreters always try to explain the various reasons and even characterize what Winnipeg was like post-optimistic era of Chicago and all that time when a lot was being built. John Atchison is here. And I'm just wondering, through the work of your book, did it add to any understanding of that time in any way? And as well, I'd like to ask is, do you see this, and I apologize that I did have a choice but to come late, so I'm looking forward to listening to the YouTube video. Do you see this in some ways symbolic of the change that occurred in Winnipeg, given what I described the changes in Winnipeg?
That Atchison left and things weren't so good afterwards. Yeah. Well, you know, we really did experience a boom, and there were so many reasons that coincided that. And I mean, when I say the city, I mean certain sector of the city, right? The business elite. You know, things weren't so good in the North End at the same time. So I mean, we have to realize this is the story of some people in Winnipeg at that time, but Winnipeg as a whole was doing well. But then, you know, different misfortunes again came at the same time. You know, with the war, with you know, a recession before the war, World War I. We lose a lot of those young men. A lot of those young men originally came from Europe, and they decided not to come back. So we had a very young demographic prior to that. And then what with labor problems with the 1919 strike, which, you know, in the end, it was made for a fairer society, but for some people, maybe they didn't like what was happening. I don't know if that was Atchison, because Atchison seemed to have a very progressive streak. And if you look at the book, his sister-in-law is mighty interesting. She lived with the family for many years, and she was a leading suffragist. We'd call her a suffragette in, Canada or in England, but she was an American suffragist, a close associate to Jane Addams, Hull House in Chicago. I mean, this is his sister-in-law. So, I mean, it's interesting, but yes, I mean, he saw that things were going down. I mean, it wasn't right away, but, things weren't good in 1918 or 1919, 1920. It was getting a bit better, but it wasn't that great. But by 23, he was an American. He'd become Canadian as soon as he could. As soon as he came to Canada, he had to do 3 years residency, but he became a Canadian as soon as he could. But he knew he could start again. His wife was still an American. 2 of his kids were born here. They were Canadian. So things were going so well there. His wife wasn't well. They're getting older. There's a better climate there. There's all sorts of reasons why he might want to go. So I think it's partly that. And he wasn't the only architect who left there. Then there were several, and they're mentioned in the book, who at the same time around that year, give or take, went to California. It's kind of like the Beverly Hillbillies, that's a place to be. Yeah, so it's exactly that story. It was exactly what Winnipeg was in 1905. LA is in 1923. And as I say, he's a bold, like as much as we don't know about his personality, you can look at how he performed, how he acted. And he certainly wasn't a shy, retiring violet. He he worked hard and he took opportunity and he took risks. And that was an example of it.
Gail, can you tell us about how he was accepted by the architectural community in Winnipeg at the time, and how he influenced that same community?
Sure. He was very much welcomed. I mean, we say, well, it was the boom of Winnipeg that attracted him. There might have been something more specific, because once he came here in the fall of 1904 to kind of see how things were, and then he came again in February, and he was already doing work on the Alexandria apartments, if you remember that, on Graham, those beautiful apartments that we needlessly pulled down. But anyways, and Devon Court, an earlier incarnation to Devon Court than that were actually built. So he's working on that, but he's also living in Chicago. He's kind of in 2 places. His wife is expecting their 2nd child, so they're gonna wait probably until the baby's born in Chicago before they come, and indeed they come in the summer of 1905. So people were expecting him. There was kind of buzz in the newspaper. The fact that he had so many commissions right away, and they had connection to Oldfield Kirby Gardner. The White House, you saw that picture, that was their building. He built that building for them. And there was such a close connection right away, and that connection remained right to the very end. Like Kirby, for example, purchased the last Atchison home when the Atchisons moved to California and stayed there for many years. It wasn't just a transaction, it was a home for him. So, I mean, yeah, so I think that, there was a place for him. People were wanting him. They wanted somebody who could build tall buildings, who had experience in steel frame construction, fire safety, in terracotta. And he also had built these beautiful apartment blocks. And Winnipeg was in need of middle and upper class apartments for the rich who didn't want to have to, have some of the responsibilities of home ownership, but have buildings that were, or units that were just as beautiful, and you'd think were a home once you were in it. So yeah, he was very well received, and in fact, he's here by the summer of 1905. By 1906, he is one of almost 40 architects who form the Manitoba Architects Association. And what do? They base it on the rules and regulations of the counterpart in Chicago. Isn't that interesting? And he is one of the first directors. So, yeah, he was welcomed, and he seemed to have a good relationship.
Yeah, for sure.
Gail, I'm struck by your observation that the only Atchison building in Manitoba outside of Winnipeg is in Emerson. You have any insight as to why? And is it possible there are other Atchison buildings out there we just don't know about?
Oh, Gordon, I thought you were gonna tell me about one. Yeah, okay, so he did have some others, but they'd be pulled out. So there was a hospital in Dauphin, but it was a pretty rudimentary hospital. This is like around 1909 or something like that. There was also one in Minnedosa that he did, another hospital. A school in Toulon that burnt down in the 1950s. And he did some expansion work to the kind of the TV complex in the net. And I guess it's a question to finding out what exactly did. I have not found that out, but it would really be lovely. You know, there was a signature of Atchison somehow, like some, but you know, there's no hallmark of what Atchison did because he did so much varied work, so many different building types. Well, what is the commonality of Atchison's work is beautiful proportions, lovely materials, you know, composition that looks just so right that it just feels good when you look at it. And that doesn't help you very much in identifying a building.
I'm neglecting over here as well. Does anybody over there have questions? We have time for a couple more if we have any that you've been sitting on. Yeah.
Gail, you talked extensively about your research and, you know, the amazing amount of time that you put in, but I'm curious on a personal level, the energy that you had to muster to do this, and given the COVID issue where you relied on someone else to do research, if there was ever a time where you just had that moment like, okay, I have to persevere. This has to keep moving, and that's what I'm curious about.
Okay, thanks, Elaine. No, this is the thing. I'm a little bit, people who know me and see me a lot laugh because it's sort of like, oh, and that reminds me about Atchison. So it was kind of irrepressible. They're as happy as I am that the book is completed because I think there might be some postpartum here that will happen. But I'm happy because we've got a book. I was so worried that Atchison would be forgotten. I'm hoping that this might allay that problem, that will not happen. But no, I'm so excited by Atchison and by this period and by buildings like this elsewhere, whether they're in the United States or in Canada. I just love this kind of architecture. So it's so much fun. And to me, architectural history isn't about, you know, the cornice and the fenestration, and I mean, we talk about that and we have to. It's like a poem. You dissect it and there are words and there's ways, but they are stories. And I was hoping that this book would be a book of stories because every building is like a person. It has its history, it has its good times, its bad times. Sometimes it gets saved, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's in critical condition, but still gets saved. So yeah, so I wanted those stories to be told, and I think maybe they have them.
Yeah, sure.
Gail, I know you're interested in physical materials like terracotta, the sensual qualities of materials used in the buildings. It was interesting during the presentation today to hear you describe the book, not only by its content, but as a physical object. Much appreciated.
Oh, thank you. And this comes from an archivist.
Yeah, sorry to hear. We need some assistance to pass this over.
Hi, Gail.
Great.
I know that you and David have created a wonderful series of videos about your train travels. Did any of those trips include visits to Atchison buildings?
Yes, yes. I'll tell you one that was a bit of a heartbreak. It was a portion of a longer trip that we took. And we were going on the track and I look out the window and I see a water tower and it says Monmouth on it. That is Atchison's hometown. I had no idea that the train was going to go right. I mean, we would have jumped off. I mean, I would have jumped off. And I mean, it was, I pulled out my phone to take a photograph, but it was too fast. It was, so yeah. So what happened is, my husband David and I, we do a lot of train travel. And at the time we were traveling in the United States, and we took a train from Vancouver to Seattle to LA, across to Chicago. And that was kind of the Christmas of 1920. See this, I'm gonna have to get used to this century. 2023, 2024. So it was December, January that we were in the United States. And so we had the pictures of California were all from that time. So you might see that there are Christmas wreaths, even though it looks jungly and gorgeous and lush, it's Christmas time. Then we get to Chicago, and poor David is taking pictures. And some of these places, you know, they weren't quite as upscale as they were in the past. And there were a lot of empty lots around us, and there'd be a lone Atchison flat. And David would be, you know, freezing his fingers, because I can tell you, as cold as it is in Winnipeg. And this was interesting. The Atchison granddaughter said, my mom said that it was really cold in Winnipeg. Well, I mean, it's just as cold in Chicago, off the lake there. And I mean, that's why he kind of came, honestly, to Winnipeg. We are the Chicago of the North because of our architecture, but we are because of our industry, our geography, you know, I think our perspective. I mean, there's a kind of a centralist kind of a view, you know, a Midwestern, Canadian prairie kind of a view, because of our industries and trades.
Yeah. I think we might have time for a couple more questions.
Hi, as I'm sure you fell down many rabbit holes during your research, I'm wondering if you had a particular favorite bit of new research that you came across during like the process of making this book.
Okay, well, yes, I'll give two examples. One was with respect to his work on the Chicago World's Fair. If you were anyone to do with anything to do with the building trade in Chicago, in 1893, well, that's when the fair opened, and it was only open for a few months. But for the preceding years, say starting around 1891, you would have had some involvement in building or working on the Chicago World's Fair. It wasn't clear what Atchison had done. There were great big pavilions, 10 of them, that really were the signature of the fair. And one of those pavilions was awarded to William LeBaron Jenney. So the thought was, oh, Atchison worked on the horticulture building, which was at that time the largest greenhouse in the world. And you know, when you started doing the research, you found out Atchison didn't get to Jenney's firm until a certain date. You know, the building was pretty much up at that point, and Alejandro in Chicago helped really cap that off with his research. What I did find out, and this was thanks to Phil Hayes, was that Atchison worked for 9 months while he was with William LeBaron Jenney on the Spectatorium, what was going to be the largest theater ever in the world. And it was largely built, and then there was a financial crash, and they stopped building. The company involved went belly up, and the building was taken down for salvage. But to know that he was involved on the Spectatorium, which is kind of a romantic building that never came to be, many patents came out of that. For example, that was the first theater that had clouds that went across the sky, kind of like the Uptown Theater here in Winnipeg. And the impresario, who was the great mind behind this building, as much as the architect, came up with all sorts of patents because he had life-size ships in water. It was kind of like a great extravaganza you would see in Rome, for example. So that was very exciting to find out how he fit into the Chicago World's Fair. And that building was adjacent to the fair. People considered it a fair building, but it really wasn't a fair building, so it's often not in the books. And the other thing is my mention of his sister-in-law, and I would say his wife. His wife was an accomplished artist. She declared herself in like the city directory as an artist before she married him. She was a member of a group called the Atlan China Club. They were China painters. It's very popular in the late 1890s and the turn of the century. And you had to be invited to be a member of this group. And this group had international renown for its patterns. They were kind of stylized patterns of nature and, just really beautiful stuff. So she was really a force to contend with. And she really was a proponent for an art school in Winnipeg and for an art gallery in Winnipeg. And she helped other artists. So she was really important. And then you have the sister, the suffragette, who was viewed even by the Americans as being not like in the mainstream suffragists. She was like a militant suffragist. And in 1930, she is of the Baha'i religion, which I think was quite unusual. And she was a peace activist. And she was like, not just a member, she was the president of multiple national and state organizations. And she's around the dinner table with Atchison on a daily basis. So I think this is a really interesting family. I think there's a lot of, I'd love to think there's scope for research. I don't know I've tried to get what I could. And then of course, this book is of a certain, level. We're not going deep down into that, but I think that would be some very exciting research, which I wish somebody would take on. I'm taking the rest.
Okay, unless we have a burning question that you've been waiting for. I think we are at that time of the evening for the signing portion. Let's give Gail a big round of applause.
Thank you, everyone.
If you haven't been here for a signing before, it's going to take place right here at the table on my right. Please feel free to have a copy of the book signed before you pay for it. So long as you visit my friends over at the cash desk before you leave, I would greatly appreciate that. Thank you to all of you for being here, both in person and online. It's been a fantastic turnout on both. So a big round of applause to yourselves. And of course, to the Winnipeg Architecture Foundation. Yes. Do not forget your roots crowns, please. And of course, another big, very warm thank you to Gail Perry, everybody. Thank you so much.
Slide here, so a little bit.
Gail, scoot this out of the way.